Litecoin's year-to-date price, in terms of percentage, is down 12% as of today. This last month, however, Litecoin has made serious strides, moving up from a year-to-date low of minus 30% here, not including wicks and lows from previous months. Even this week, it moved from minus 12 and ranged up to only minus 3 at the height of the wick, indicating that Litecoin at least has the ability to move up, even if it does get pulled back down relatively quickly. With other cryptocurrencies like XRP putting in new all-time highs, and much larger cap cryptocurrencies like Ethereum putting in 10-15% moves on certain days, it raises the question, is Litecoin a forgotten about relic of the past, or is it just late to the party? In today's video, I'm going to look at previous cycles, compare them to each other, and see what we might be able to glean from those comparisons to hopefully further improve your understanding of Litecoin's price history and patterns. I'm going to start this off by painting the broad strokes of what we've seen with Litecoin over the last two-ish cycles, or at least the first two. So at the start, to kick things off, we usually have a strong bear run. Now this is where our data starts for Litecoin. Litecoin does go further back than 2014, but it's hard to get accurate or even reliable data, and the market was so small then that we don't really need it. It would be useful, but we don't really need it. So we come into a bear market at this point, and obviously we trade down for over a year. We put in our low, and then we immediately get a heartbeat type of a move. We get a strong move up, and then a strong move down. But we stay at a higher price, a more elevated price than where we moved up from. So it's a net positive. We then continue to do nothing for a while, even though if you zoom in, these are quite choppy times. It just doesn't look it compared to this god candle over here. But we eventually reach this kind of double top stage where we get our first high, which is the highest, and then our second lower high, 29 weeks apart from each other. The whole move lasting about 48 weeks, and from the low to the low, so the low after the first high to the low after the second high, being about 31 weeks. Another important thing to note is that this high occurs before the halving. And then once we get this high, we get a pretty strong move pretty quickly afterwards, within a few months of the peak. Now, zooming out again, just so we see the broad strokes, bear market, heartbeat, nothing, and then first top, second top lower, first one before the halving. Let's take a look at the second cycle. So here we get our long bear run, okay, which again lasts for about a year. We then get our heartbeat, but it's much more prolonged. It's much more drawn out. It's not this kind of 3-month up and down. It's flatter. But we can see the similarities in that when we reach this low, we get this bump, and then we stay at elevated prices. Now there is an exception here, and that exception being we wick down to these lows after the first high. So our pre-halving peak, we come back down below to these lows. Whereas before we didn't really touch them. Once we'd moved up from them, we stayed above them. This cycle, we pretty quickly revisit them. And there's no real dilly-dallying between the pull down and the first peak here. Whereas before we had a good 6 months of trading sideways. So again, some variation here, but again, the broad strokes are still being followed. Bear market, heartbeat, first high before the halving, second lower high after the halving. The time frames are similar as well. From peak to peak is 27 weeks. Here it was 29. Low to low, last cycle was 31. Here it's 28. So again, parts of the cycle are playing out very similarly in terms of time frame and move. Some of them are just playing out similarly just in the case of the movement. So overall, pretty similar to each other over the halving period. More specifically, before the halving is where we get our similarities. And it's the same here from kind of the peak to just after the halving. Looks pretty similar. The key difference here being that this heartbeat is much shorter, but we get a big interim before the first peak and the halving. Here not the halving, the heartbeat. Here we get the heartbeat and then we go straight into the first peak. But the heartbeat is longer and there's no interim. So ultimately it's the same thing. And we can even see, we can measure this from kind of looking at how how long after did we get the halving after our first peak? Here it's about 2 months. Sorry, that's 3 months there. Here it will obviously not be. It'll be pretty close, pretty close to the halving. We get it, a month later. But I still think it's a good indication that I hope you're seeing the points that I'm trying to make here. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to hit exact price points at exact times. But an event happens, and however long that event takes, it generally has happened. Or at least it has happened so far for these two cycles in comparison. And just actually as a little interest for myself, moving up from this low to this high, how far did we go? 130% here from the low to the previous low. Here it was about 65% from the low to the low. That's pretty rough and ready. Don't look at that too hard, but it is interesting that it's about half the volatility. Now again, another kind of key difference to note before we move on to the current cycle is that obviously the bull run here, back during our first point of comparison, is far more explosive and volatile than what we got this second cycle. But it does look, to be honest with you, pretty similar to the second half of this move, excluding this kind of move that's in blue here. From this point on, they do look pretty similar. Keynote, we did get slightly higher highs back in the previous cycle compared to the first, but they are so minuscule in difference, I don't think it's worth actually making a note of. I would call these the same price, basically. Another important thing to take note of, which might be obvious to a lot of you, but just in case, I'm going to say it. As time has gone on, you'll obviously notice that the volatility with Litecoin has gone down. From this point on here with this cycle, we kind of didn't go much lower than these lows here. And if we kind of give a bit more detail, the lowest point of the last cycle was at the beginning of it. Volatility shrank. And even though we did technically put in new all-time highs, we didn't really. We returned to the previous high. And so you can kind of see, very rough and ready, how we're kind of coning in. The lows are getting higher, but the highs, I would argue, are also reducing. Volatility is decreasing. And this is normal, and this is good for a more mature asset in a space. Again, I think Litecoin is 8.6 billion in market cap. That's a pretty big market cap. It is crypto, so you do expect volatile moves, but in any other industry, you really wouldn't, to be honest with you. I think compared to a lot of cryptocurrencies, over the last 6 years, Litecoin has been stable in a sense. And if you look at a lot of the cryptocurrencies from the same era as Litecoin, like Monero, like XRP, they are pretty stable, with the exception now of XRP, which with all this new attention has gone on to put in new all-time highs. Which does raise the question of how valid is Litecoin compared to XRP. It's got none of this press or coverage that XRP does, but we're not talking about XRP right now. We're looking at Litecoin. And again, just to reaffirm, first two cycles, very similar in moves. What did we get this cycle? What are we currently experiencing? Well, we get our bear market. This is shorter, I would argue. You can argue if it's from the peak, it's about the same length. But if you're arguing for where the majority of the downward trading came from, it's a shorter time period. We hit our low, and then we get our heartbeat. Our heartbeat is not looking like a heartbeat at this point. It's looking like a very slow climb upwards. And as the cycles have gone on, again, this goes back to the volatility. It's like you put a brick at the peak here and came back to it 4 years later. So you put a brick here and it sagged a little bit. And then you put another brick on top of it, came back 4 years later, and now it's really sagged, But anyway, we get the heartbeat. The price stays elevated from where we moved up from. And so far we haven't been down to return to that. And even our wicks low, like our low wicks, our lowest wicks, haven't really reached the lows that we were at. I mean, they did really, but if you're not looking at wicks, if you're excluding wicks, we didn't come back down. If you are including wicks, we didn't break back down our previous wicks. So overall, it's been higher lows in general. Again, like the cycle before, we get this heartbeat and there's no real messing around. We kind of go straight into the pre-halving peak. Again, what's interesting here is, first of all, that this second peak is higher here. So in every previous cycle, the second peak has been lower. Here it's been higher. And the other thing is that it took longer for this to happen. So again, going back 27 weeks, 29 weeks, here it's 35 weeks. It's the same story between the lows. It's taken much longer. 35 weeks here from this low to this low, and that's the low after each peak. So the lowest points after each peak, 35 weeks, cycle before 28, cycle before that 31. So definitely some differentiation. And of course, kind of the big elephant in the room is that pretty soon after these peaks, the first cycle took us about 12 weeks for us to be hitting these crazy candles. Second cycle, about 12 weeks for us to have broken past the previous high here. Currently, we, from the peak, are on week 32. You know, we're close to 3 times the duration, longer than what it's done in previous cycles. And if you also measure it from the halving, which is, you know, kind of another fixed event, this first cycle, 38 weeks from the halving. The second cycle, we'll say 27 weeks from the halving. Current cycle, 65 weeks since the halving. It's been over a year since we've had our halving. And we are below the price we were at when we crossed into the halving, realistically, at this peak here. Which does worry me, to be honest with you. It does kind of set off red flags for Litecoin. Where you look at other coins like Solana, Cardano, that are well above where they were during the halving. Litecoin does continue to struggle. And, you know, going back to the beginning of the video, the yearly open to where we are now is down 12%. And Litecoin, let me show you this actually. Very quickly. I don't know how much of this you can see, but we're currently blue here. So this is us. We're halfway through 2025. So far, we've been pretty flatlined for the whole year. But if you look at 2024, we were up 40%. So that's pretty good. 2023, up 2%. 2022, down 50%. 2021, up 15%. You know, it's kind of, we're averaging out a lot of the time. All these gains that we get in one cycle are kind of gone from the next. Yeah, we went up to 38% in 2024, but that's 40% up from a cycle where we moved down 53%, you know? And that shows itself on the chart because since 2022, Litecoin has moved down. And in fact, it's never reached the kind of yearly open of 2022. We've never returned to that high. We got rejected from it once here. Recently. I say recently, it was 7 months ago. And ever since, nothing really. Again, up until this last kind of week, where we saw this big drop off in price, where if you want to look from wick to wick, Litecoin moved down again, over 50%, and then slowly started climbing back up with almost these steps-like movement. For me, personally, I would not and do not hold Litecoin. I've never owned it really. I've mined it, but I've always put it into something else pretty quick. I'm not telling you what to do, but for me, I feel like there's a higher chance of me if I put my money in Solana, I think there's a greater chance of me making more money in that. I think I'm exposed to the same amount of risk. You know, Solana is a higher market cap cryptocurrency, so I'd almost argue it's lower risk. But in my opinion, it has a higher upside, looking at its previous price performance. For Litecoin, for me, over the last 2 cycles, it's double topped, you know, at its all-time high. And as time goes on, I would argue volatility is only going to reduce unless there's some kind of big catalyst for Litecoin. And for me, I don't see how that could be because Litecoin isn't really doing anything. It's not innovating. It's not creating anything new. It's, you know, people like to call it the silver to Bitcoin's gold. I don't really think that's true either. I just think it's a currency with a huge market cap, but it's kind of stagnant. And I don't think something like that can go on to really break its previous all-time high when it hasn't really been able to do it before. Why would I assume anything different? Solana every cycle has broken its all-time high. Cardano every cycle has broken its all-time high. Ethereum every cycle has broken its all-time high. Bitcoin has broken its all-time high every cycle. Litecoin has not. For me, it's risky to put my money in Litecoin, and the potential upside is lower, in my opinion. And again, if Litecoin does literally rocket up to its previous high tomorrow, that's a 300% move. We looked at Cardano's yesterday. And that was about, I think it was a 5x, all-time high for Cardano is $3, and it's currently trading at 80 cents. I would have more hope in Cardano returning to its all-time high than Litecoin. It's a higher market cap altcoin. It's in the top 10. If there is poor sentiment in the crypto space, chances are Cardano is going to handle it better because it's got the higher market cap. It's more likely not going to drop as far as Litecoin will, having over double Litecoin's market cap. So for me, if something goes bad, I think Cardano will drop less. But if something good happens, I think Cardano will go up further. I still think Cardano is extremely risky, but I would say Litecoin is riskier. I don't think you touch crypto if you have a low risk tolerance, but I also think there's, calculated risk, and then there's kind of just eyes wide closed, following hype type of risk. I think the latter usually burns people more than it rewards them. I mean, again, to summarize, just over these cycles, we get the bear market, the heartbeat, the pre-halving high, the post-halving high, then bull run. We've had all of these things so far with Litecoin. Again, it's just this cycle so far has been more prolonged, more delayed. And we've seen that as cycles have gone on. So perhaps it's a sign that as time goes on, Litecoin just needs longer to make the same moves. Perhaps it's a sign of Litecoin being forgotten about and nobody using it. I don't know. I'm not here to tell you what will happen. But again, even if it does reach its previous all-time high, that's only a 300% move. I say only. A lot of money can be made in that. But again, if you bought before 2022, basically, you were never in the green once. Even after all this really good stuff happening, you were never in the green. You cannot say the same about many other altcoins with higher market caps. Anyway, quick look at the BTC chart. Again, this is my favorite chart in all of cryptocurrency, just because I think it does such a great job of explaining why I wouldn't call myself a Bitcoin maximalist, but I think it is the best asset to hold in crypto for the majority of the time. Actually, I think I would call myself a Bitcoin maximalist. I would be extremely impressed with how Bitcoin has developed and the idea of it. That's what got me into the crypto space to begin with. It was more the kind of science behind Bitcoin than the money. But yeah, Bitcoin maximalist then. I think it does a good job of explaining why altcoins are very risky compared to Bitcoin. And now Bitcoin and Litecoin are both old coins. They've been around for a long time. Well over a decade at this point. Bitcoin coming close to 2 decades. Litecoin not too far away from that itself. Litecoin, however, has never been able to put in a new high against Bitcoin. And even as time's gone on, it's struggled to overtake previous highs. And this is even during bull runs. It struggles to overtake previous highs. For me, that is not a sign of a growing asset, I would say. Especially as Bitcoin is probably the best thing to compare against in the Bitcoin space, in the crypto space, to understand how well your asset performs. Because Bitcoin is kind of the marker, the benchmark. And Litecoin looks abysmal. A quick stat for you. Let me just give you the full picture here. Since launch, and this is at launch, not its all-time high, its launch. The current price is down minus 97%, 0.5 from its launch price. Now, if I was looking at Litecoin, I would never look at it as a chance of, when are we going to get back to these all-time highs? I would be looking at it as, if I was trying to make money with Litecoin, I would look at it at, when are we going to see one of these types of a move? Where are we going to see one of these kind of strong upticks against Bitcoin? You're almost becoming a trader here, basically. Because you don't want to hold Litecoin for too long, because statistically it says you'll lose money to it against Bitcoin. That's what it's only done over its lifetime. It's only lost money to Bitcoin. But of course there have been times of, market inefficiency, you could say, or whatever, where Litecoin has gone up rapidly in comparison to Bitcoin. Now this has become rarer and rarer as time has gone on. I mean, you can see last cycle this only really happened twice, where it was prolonged. You had a couple of weeks where price was decent, but realistically it was only here where we got a prolonged move, and here where we got a prolonged move. These were both a month each. That was it then. Whereas the cycle before that, I would say you had many opportunities to make a lot of money. Excuse the kind of zoom out because of this really fake wick. But you had strong moves here for over 2-3 months where you could have made a lot of money holding Litecoin instead of Bitcoin. Same thing here, you had a month or two of good price movement. Here you had like multiple months of slow but steady growth. So that was 3 last cycle, and they were better chances of making money. They went on longer and they moved higher. The cycle before that, same similar story. You had these moves that were really strong. Now they didn't last as long as this cycle, but it definitely looked a lot better than what we got last cycle and what we're currently getting this cycle. And if you want to take a look at an even more bleak statistic, if we pull up kind of the yearly moves of Litecoin, the majority of them are well below zero. The one being closest to zero that's negative is minus 24%, 23%. Ranging as low as minus 60%. This is only from 2020 onwards. If we bring this further back, we get one good year here of good price performance where we actually where we make crypto worthy gains. Again, the only other good year was 34%, which I would say in crypto isn't really worth it. If we get every single price point of Litecoin, there are only 2 that have been negative against Bitcoin. And what's worse is there wasn't really anything really in common about these 2 positive years. It's not like you can look at them and try and compare them. From the mid-year, they were in completely different positions. 2022 was only actually a positive year because in November, the general space got a rally and Litecoin happened to catch a bit of that. And it just brought it up above kind of the 0 mark, up to 30. But every other year has been negative. And the last time it was positive was almost a decade ago. Just hold Bitcoin. If you're gonna, it's not worth. The amount of risk you're taking on for the smallest chance of slightly outperforming Bitcoin is just not worth. Again, if you guys haven't heard of the Sharpe ratio, I would really recommend you check that out. And it's been a while since I can't remember if I did. If a Sharpe ratio basically measures, the amount of risk you take per unit of reward. How much reward you can potentially get per unit of risk you take on. So the higher the Sharpe ratio, the better. LTC, BTC is going to have a very low Sharpe ratio because all it's done is go down. Now, it does require a bit of kind of calculations, so it might take a bit of time that way, but I think it's a very educational thing to do, to be honest with you. And again, for an asset that's down 97% from its launch to current price, I would say it's not something I would want to put my money in. I would just write that off straight away. I wouldn't even look at it. So yeah, again, if you are planning on trying to make some money with Litecoin and you haven't bought any, but you're looking to get your Bitcoin for it, I would say now could be a good time. Like we see oftentimes Litecoin goes through a very strong long-term downward move before and after the halving. And it usually lasts somewhere close to 2 years. This kind of move before we break above it again. We broke above it at the end of last year, but we've ultimately continued to keep trading down after that breakup, which also isn't unusual. If you want to look at the last cycle, once we broke above it, we still continued to trade down for, how long was this? From that peak, we still continued to trade down for basically a year afterwards. So if you want to go from this peak and measure out a year, you're well away from it, you know what I mean? You've got a long way to go, and in fact, we're only just about halfway, not even. If you want to look at the cycle before, when we broke up above it, we went straight up. So we obviously haven't followed that because we've continued to put in lower lows after breaking above it. Or at least you'd hope we haven't had it, because if that's the move, you're done, basically, you're done. If you could short LTC, BTC, I don't know if you can, I haven't looked at it, I would be doing that, to be honest with you. Maybe I wouldn't do it now, because there's a higher likelihood that Litecoin will make some kind of a strong move against Bitcoin. But I think ultimately that can only come in an environment that allows it. And I think the current monetary climate is just too unpredictable at the moment. Rates are still not being cut, which I think is a good thing. But I also think for the crypto space, that's obviously not what it wants. crypto is at the very furthest end of the risk curve. It needs low rates for money to make it that far down the risk curve. You need more money to come into the space. You know, the markets are a zero-sum game. So look, for me, Litecoin is a no-go. If you've watched the channel or watched any of my Litecoin videos before, you know this is true about me. I would almost hold a bias against it. But my bias against it wouldn't come from the fact that I think it's fundamentally flawed or anything like this. I'm sure Litecoin serves a purpose and it serves it well. I haven't really found that service, to be honest with you. I haven't tried too hard to find it. But looking just alone at the price of Litecoin, I don't think a lot of people have found that service, that function either. General sentiment indicates that it doesn't know. And it's not about, the markets aren't about you being right. It doesn't matter what you think if nobody else thinks it, realistically. And that's why, I would look at myself as a value investor, which I know is kind of contradictory, as I'm doing TA, But that's why, people can find these great companies that are really undervalued, and they just stay undervalued forever because nobody else finds them. Nobody else realizes that they're undervalued, and nobody cares. It's the same thing with Litecoin, perhaps. Nobody's found anything to get excited about with Litecoin, so nobody's bothering. There are all these other things that are more exciting in the crypto space that I would argue have better risk-return ratios, and so they're putting their money there. I mean, Litecoin's in the weird middle where it's like, if you want to be conservative in the crypto space, you put your money in Bitcoin and maybe in Ethereum. You might split it between the two, like 70-30. Or if you want to just go all-out gamble, you'll put it in like a basket of altcoins, like Cardano, or, Avalanche, Solana, Chainlink, Casper, Sonic, all these other coins, Or you can go even further down the risk curve for lower market cap alts, like all these meme coins that have been blowing up and rug pulling. Litecoin's in that weird middle where it's not big enough that it's a safe bet. It's also not really big enough that it's a safe altcoin bet. It's not super mainstream. It doesn't grab news. And it's not like small enough that it's like low risk could moonshot. So it doesn't really fit it doesn't fit the two main agendas that people in the crypto space, would have, in my opinion. And that's why, again, it could be a great coin. It just might not ever be recognized by anyone else that it is a great coin. I think Litecoin probably falls into that category. But anyway, I'm going to wrap it up here. The video's been going on long enough. If you liked the video, please leave a like. Really helps out. If you didn't leave a dislike, that's totally fine too, but please explain to me why you didn't like the video. I always want to get better, so please, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a comment. Hope you're all doing well. Take care and peace.